Excel Accounting Practice Problem. Create Accounting Worksheet Part number 5. Get ready because we're about to excel with Excel. Here we are in our Excel worksheet. In prior presentations, we put this information together from a blank or starting with a blank Excel worksheet. We're going to be continuing on from here. If you have access to this workbook, there'll be 2 tabs on down below, an example tab and a practice tab. The example tab in essence being an answer key. Let's look at the example tab now. We started off by creating the data where we're going to be putting the data input, the journal entries. Then we created a trial balance, the beginning trial balance and ending trial balance. We then created the general ledger for all of the accounts, creating some space so that we can record transactions as we go. We totaled up the information up top right here to indicate that the debits equal the credits. We're going to do one more check figure up top, so we'll make a little bit of an adjustment to this. We'll also format the general ledger so that we can see it's a general ledger and kind of get it going across here a few more times so that we can see it's the general ledger all the way across. And then we'll move on to some subsidiary ledgers, which will be including the accounts receivable subsidiary ledger and then the accounts payable, talking about why we might need those as we go through our practice problem. So I'm going to go all the way back to the left here, and then I'm going to go to the practice tab. And so we have the same information on the practice tab. We got our data input for where we're going to put our journal entries. Then we have our general ledger. This 0 up top represents all the ending balances, showing us that we are in balance at 0. But notice that could be the case that we just don't include something in the general ledger that we included over here. It might be nice to have one other check figure. So let's think of if we could put in another check figure in which we already calculated down below, which is net income. So this net income, I can kind of double check that possibly to the GL accounts, just looking at the GL accounts related to the net income. So let's give that a shot here. What I'm going to do is pull this general ledger on over to the right. So I'm going to pull this, let's pull it all the way to column O right now. And then I'm going to put my cursor in column L, and I'm going to add up just the income and expense accounts from the general ledger and see if we come up to that same 24,710 on the negative. So I'm going to say equals. I'm going to scroll all the way to the right. So we got our revenue and expense accounts. They start here on AK, and I want to make sure I pick the ending balances up so that this will be populated as we enter data. So I'm going to pick up that 200, then I'm going to say plus, then the 160 plus, the 1600 plus, the 600 plus, the 490 plus. Notice it's adding up top, the 8,000 plus, and then I'm going to pick up this 2007. It's still adding up plus the 19. Now, if I added that correctly, it should come up to the same net income number. So there's the 24,700 on the negative. Scrolling down, we have the same 24,700 here. And then I could give another, like a 0 check figure number. So what I'm going to do is take this, format paint it right there. And let's say I want to take this number minus what we got on the trial balance. And I'm going to pick this up at the end, the 24,710. And that should be 0 if we have the same amounts there. Therefore, if I record something on this side that affects an income statement account and I don't record it over here, then it'll show up as a 0, and this 0 won't be 0, and I can see that quite clearly. So we'll go and we could do that for each of these parts. Like I could sum up the assets and then have that as a check figure, and then the liabilities and so on. But I'm going to keep it just with this at this point. So that'll be our check figure. I can also then, I want to make that with the same conditional formatting so that if it's above 1, I would like it to turn red. If it's below 1, or -1, I would like it to turn red. If it's between, I would like it to be green. That's the same conditional formatting we have here and down here. Therefore, I'll use the format painter to go format paint it and paste it right there. So there we go. So now if it's -2, turns red. If it was 2, it turns red. If it's 0, it's good. I'm going to undo. Hold on a second. Redo. There we got it. Okay, so there it is. So there it is between those. So let's put that one more time. Format right there. Okay. So and then this one, I'm just going to make this black and white. because it's part of the header. So we just got to kind of know what that one is. That's net income. So I'm not going to label it. I'm just going to make it black and white. So these are my two check figures. If it's out of balance, that'll show us. And if my net income doesn't tie out to the trial balance, that'll show us. Okay, now let's format the trial balance, the general ledger items up top. So I have this GL right here. I'd like to kind of standardize this to kind of copy it across every so often. So what I'd like to do is possibly put this first one right next to it, like right here. So I'm going to try to center this across that cell. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here. I'm going to format paint it so it's not centered right now. And then I want to center it just between these cells. To do so, I'm not going to use the center here because I don't like the way that makes my columns have that problem where there's one giant cell. So I don't do that. I'll typically undo that. I'll right click on it instead. And then we're going to go to format paint this thing. And we're going to go to alignment, horizontal, and I'm going to center across the selection. So there is that. And then I'm going to put that same thing here, well, let's do it this way. Instead of doing that, I'm going to put my cursor here, and this is going to be equal to that cell. It's got to be the first cell because that's where it starts. And this one, I'm going to center across this whole selection. So it's across kind of two sets of the GL to space it out. Right click, I'm going to say format painter, and we're going to center it across the selected area. So there we have that. And then I'll do the same thing here. I'm going to say this equals, I'm going to bring it all the way back to the first one. And I'm going to center that across like the next two sets. So from here to here, let's say. Right click, and then we'll format the cells, alignment, and we're going to say center that across the selection. So that looks good. I'm going to do it here. We're going to say that equals the first one way over here. Going to grab that and we're going to center it across the selection. Going to right click. Now you could do this, by the way. You could take this now, format paint it to here, and it should do the same thing. And then I'm going to say this equals the first one way over here. I like to pull it from the first one, and then we could do our format painting, taking this format painter and put it there. So there we have it. Okay, so there's our formatting. Next, we want to think about the subsidiary ledgers. I'm going to put that way to the right, and you're saying, hey, you're way out there on the right, but we can hide the cells. So that's the idea. So what I'd like to do is be able to say, okay, I can hide these cells from column AW on over to, let's say, column J, and then right click and hide those cells. And so now we've got our information right next to it here. Now we might want to do some copying as well with regards to the format, but I just want to look at it at this point. Now we're looking at the accounts receivable here, and this is going to be broken out by detail on the general ledger, but we'd also like to see it broken out by customer. That's going to be a common format to see who owes us money. So I'd like to be breaking this out by customer too, which is why we need this subsidiary ledger. We're going to need another subsidiary ledger for a similar purpose on the accounts payable, breaking it by vendor. So in other words, this account shows us how much people owe us. And so the next question is, well, who owes us the money? We can't get that from the GL, which is just broken out by date. We got to get it from a subsidiary ledger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this column small again. And then I'm going to call this, then up top, we're going to call this the accounts receivable. Now I'm going to call it a subsidiary ledger. Now you might see it called something else. You might see it called, it'll be a similar report to accounts receivable aging report or accounts receivable detailed by customer report or something like that. But it's another ledger that's subordinate in essence to the general ledger. The general ledger is the primary ledger. The accounts receivable subsidiary ledger will be subordinate to it in that it will tie out to the ending balance on the subsidiary ledger. The ending balance on the subsidiary ledger is really what kind of leads to the ending balance that will be here on the trial balance and therefore on the financial statements. So then we can kind of copy the formatting for how we might look at the layout for the subsidiary ledger. So in order to do that, I'm going to actually unhide. I'm going to select from here on over to AY, right click and unhide. And let's pick up a format so I can format it in a similar way. And what I'd like to do is use the green. So I'm going to pick up like a green one over here. I'm going to pick up this green one, and I'm just going to copy that formatting. I'm going to copy that, and then I'll put it over here, but I'll change some components of it. So I'm going to put it right there. This top piece is going to be black and white in some way. So I'm going to make that black and white. We'll format it more thoroughly later. And then instead of referencing an account, I'm going to reference a customer. Customer 1. Now, I'm just going to type in the customers because these are things that we would have to make as we go. I'd have to have a subsidiary ledger per customer and then show the transaction detail as we go through the customers. So then we're going to say the balance is going to be the same. I'm going to make up basically the balance. So I'll go back into that in a second, but I'm just going to now copy this down. And let's just say we have 4 customers that make up that first balance. Customer 1, and then I'm going to say this is customer 2, customer 2, and then I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to take this over to here, Control C, and I'm going to paste that right there. And then I don't need to restate the name, so I'll keep that as is. I'm going to make this black and white, and then this will just be customer 3, and then this will be customer 4. So we might have to add customers later. We might have to add GLs. You could see that could be a bit tedious because we'll have to push things to the right and so on, and we'll deal with that later and see how can we format this if I need to add a customer or something like that. So we'll deal with that later. You can also put customers, by the way, in a lot of this stuff like the GL on a separate tab, but then you're bouncing back and forth between tabs, which might be okay, but sometimes that confuses people too. So you got to trade off between hiding cells, unhiding cells, and having multiple tabs. I'm trying to put it all in one place right now so that we could basically work at it from one worksheet. Okay, so now I'm gonna hide the cells from AW on over to the trial balance, and then right click and hide those cells. So now we've got our customer information right next to it, and I'm just gonna make up the beginning balances, and then we'll go from there as we kind of enter transactions and see how we can tie in the accounts receivable. So I'm gonna say, okay, well, we know that the accounts receivable here is 2,000. So I need to say, all right, this is going to be, let's say this is going to be like 1,000. And then let's say this one, just going to make it 600. And then I'm going to make this one just 400 for our 3 customers. And let's say that the customer balance for 4 is 0 at that point. So we have another customer that we can add at a later point. And then I need to show that if I add up these 3, it'll add up to that 2,000 and give us our check figure. So to do that, I'm going to pull this one. I'm going to pull this one to the right. I'm going to pull it 2 cells to the right. Or you could cut and paste it 2 cells to the right. And then I'm going to add up the totals here. Notice I'm adding up the ending of the running balances. So this is going to equal this 1,000 plus this 600 plus this 400 plus this 100. And that adds up to 2,000, which is the same as this number here. And I'd like to double check that with a formula that will give us a nice double check on it. So I'm going to say, all right, well, let's take this equals that 2,000 minus whatever in the ending balance on the trial balance, which should also match what's on the general ledger. And I'll say, okay, that should add up to 0. And then I want to do the same kind of check figure here. So if that is 0, then it should be good. If it turns anything other than 0, meaning I want to do conditional formatting. If it turns like over 1, I'd like it to turn red. If it becomes less than -1, I'd like it to turn red, giving some room for rounding. And if it's between -1 and 1, I'd like it to be green. We did that formatting down here. So I'm just going to copy that formatting using the clipboard. And I'm going to paste that right there. There we have that. And then this one, I'm going to make it black and white as kind of part of our data up top. And then these ones, I'm going to center that across, even though it's taking up pretty much the whole space anyways. Right click on that. I'm going to format paint it, alignment, and let's go to center that one across. So there we have it. So now we've got that. lined up on the subsidiary ledger. So now every time I enter a transaction, if I unhide this, I'm going to take this and right click and unhide. Every time I enter a transaction that's going to impact the accounts receivable, I want to post it here to show that I'm posting it here. And then I'm going to have to post it to the accounts receivable general ledger to see the change there. And then I'm also going to have to post it to the subsidiary ledger per customer way over here. And that'll give us an idea of how all these things kind of basically tie together as they tie together. If you use a database program, then some of that first data input could help you to pull in to all the other data, but this will help you get a good idea of how a database program would kind of work and how like a software program might force you to use a customer for some transactions and so on and so forth, because it's trying to create a subledger by customer for certain things. So that's what we'll do. Next time, we'll do the same thing for the accounts payable subsidiary ledger.